Former President Donald Trump's acquittal on charges of inciting a deadly attack on the U.S. Capitol left Democrats and Republicans deeply divided on Sunday. This comes as his Democratic successor, Joe Biden, sought to move on with his political and economic agenda. Democrats say they will now look to the courts for possible civil and criminal charges against the former Republican president over the assault by his supporters on the 6th of January, which left 5 people dead. The Senate trial concluded last night with a 57-43 vote in favor of convicting Trump. The vote was bipartisan, with 7 Republicans joining the Democrats and independents, but the tally fell short of the 2/3 needed to secure a conviction. After the verdict, a fractured Republican Party was battling over the way forward, with some senators who voted to convict facing swift backlash in their home states.
The acquittal comes less than a week into the Senate trial and over a month after the attack on the United States Congress on January 6th that was in session affirming the presidential election win of President Joe Biden.
The yeas are 57. The nays are 43. 2/3 of the senators present not having voted guilty. The Senate judges that the respondent, Donald John Trump, former President of the United States, is not guilty as charged in the article of impeachment.
And so it was that Donald Trump escaped conviction in no less than 2 impeachment trials, with 43 Republicans voting to acquit, including the Senate Minority Leader, who took to the floor after his not guilty vote to eviscerate the former president for his role in inciting the mob.
They did this because they'd been fed wild falsehoods by the most powerful man on earth. Because he was angry he lost an election. Former President Trump's actions preceded the riot for a disgraceful dereliction of duty. There's no question, none, that President Trump is practically and morally responsible for provoking the events of the day. No question about it. The people who stormed this building believed they were acting on the wishes and instructions of their president. And having that belief was a foreseeable consequence of the growing crescendo of false statements, conspiracy theories, and reckless hyperbole, which the defeated president kept shouting into the largest megaphone on planet Earth.
McConnell warned that the former president could still be held criminally liable for his actions while in office, as Democrats rebuked Republicans for what they called hypocrisy in preventing a conviction.
This was the most egregious violation of the presidential oath of office and a textbook example, a classic example of an impeachable offense worthy of the Constitution's most severe remedy. In response to the incontrovertible fact of Donald Trump's guilt, the Senate was subject to a feeble and sometimes incomprehensible defense of the former president. Unable to dispute the case on the merits, the former president's counsel treated us to partisan vitriol, false equivalence, and outright falsehoods. We heard the roundly debunked jurisdictional argument that the Senate cannot try a former official, a position that would mean that any president could simply resign to avoid accountability for an impeachable offense, a position which in effect would render the Senate powerless to ever enforce the disqualification clause in the Constitution.
The Senate decision closing this chapter on the Trump presidency, but leaves open the possibility that he could seek elected office in the future, including running for president again. Sherwin Bricepies, SABC News, New York.
And for more on the U.S. political outlook, I'm joined on the line by U.S. foreign policy expert Brooke Spector. He joins us now from Johannesburg. Mr. Spector, a very good evening to you. Thanks for joining us. Welcome to The Globe.
Good evening. Good to be with you.
Now, former President Donald Trump's acquittal, what does it mean in terms of, the United States political issues and the U.S. power dynamics, power balances and imbalances, as it were, as part of the legacy of President Donald Trump in Washington?
Well, a couple of things are important to keep in mind. Donald Trump now is an ex-president with 2 asterisks after his name in any history book, in any account. He will be the only president to have been impeached twice in one 4-year term, although acquitted in both cases. But this is something he will not be able to shake. Mitch McConnell, who you played a lengthy excerpt from his speech after the vote, he was so scathing in his criticism of Donald Trump, it makes you wonder why he simply didn't just bite the bullet and vote to convict and encourage others to do so. And the answer is part of the answer to your question, in that Mitch McConnell, as the Senate minority leader, is now desperate to keep his bitterly divided party in a minority case in both houses in the Congress and out of the White House. He's trying desperately to keep it together, even though it is very clear now to anybody with eyes and ears that there are 2 very different wings in that Republican Party. One that you might have previously thought of as the more standard Republican conservative, small government, low taxes, active international presence party, and the other, the party of conspiracies and suspicions about all kinds of ridiculous things. And to keep these 2 groups together is going to be a supreme balancing act for Mitch McConnell, and in fact in the House of Representatives as well. But what this does do for Democrats is that it makes it slightly easier, in spite of the bad taste from the acquittal, it makes it slightly easier for Joe Biden's legislative agenda to move forward, because the distraction from the circus of the impeachment is no longer part of the drill for them. And there are obviously some issues they need to pay attention to yesterday already. One, of course, is the COVID pandemic and the way in which the vaccines are rolled out, and treatment facilities, and all the rest of that. And then the other, of course, is the economic collapse that the pandemic helped cause. That's just 2 issues to pay attention to, and they are central to the Biden legislative agenda. He still has to get some of his cabinet confirmed by the Senate, and all of the sub-cabinet offices that get confirmed by the Senate, they have to as well. So it is really pressure on him to focus attention in the Senate on setting up the government rather than simply paying attention to this trial. But the other part of it, and again, Mitch McConnell alluded to it, and we have to, again, we wonder why he didn't just switch votes, is that Donald Trump is facing an extraordinary collection of possible legal entanglements, most of which are not even connected to the January 6th riot on the Capitol. Many of them are financial issues or possible not necessarily correctly paid taxes. A number of them relate to the possibility that there was incorrect, parentheses, fraudulent information provided for loans for many of the property developments that his businesses were involved in. And there is the very small and unimportant matter of something like $400 million, and I'm not even sure how many rand that is. That's just a lot of rand that his companies owe to a number of banks that he signed for personally. And because most of his business now is tied up in hospitality or real estate or entertainment, all of these had been extremely negatively affected by the COVID economic circumstances.
Yeah.
And quite frankly, people are not desperate to go check into a Trump hotel anymore.
Mr. Spector, could this perhaps be an indication of the enormous influence that he still holds over the Republican Party? And if so, what do you make of those Republicans who joined the Democrats, in voting against him?
Well, I think the second question first. I think they were brave. They were doing their jobs. But it is important to keep in mind that a number of them made those choices because they're not up for re-election in the next 2 years. And some of them have already indicated they don't wish to stand for re-election when their term is over. So they felt the freedom of conscience. I'm one of those people who say that this business is going to make it ever harder for Donald Trump to exercise the kind of influence that he might wish to have over his party. Look, the man is not a young man. To wait until 2024 and try again, he will be 78 years old, too. And there is a whole generation of younger Republicans, both in that wing and in the more standard conservative wing, all of whom will think they should be president because it is generational at that point. And not to put too fine a point on it, some of them include people like the former Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, several senators, Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio, former UN ambassador and governor of South Carolina, Nikki Haley, and that's just to name a small handful. Mike Pence would have been in that group, but by doing the business that he did in the Senate in adjudicating that the credentials for the electoral votes were as they should have been, he's now roundly excoriated by Republicans of the Trumpian version, at least. So I don't think Mike Pence will be chasing after the presidential nomination.
Mr. Spector, we know that his acquittal is not an implication of whether he's guilty or not, because he simply escaped conviction on a technicality. So moving forward, what are his chances of running for public office or political office again?
Well, as I was explaining just a bit ago, I think it is much less likely than many people do, because he is going to be very busy trying to deal with a whole range of legal issues in the city and state of New York, in Georgia, where he may well be accused of vote tampering, in Washington, D.C., for charges that relate to the way in which he handled the attack on the Capitol. Remember, 5 people died, and usually when someone dies a violent death, there are people who wish for someone to be held accountable for this.
All right.
So I don't. This is me personally, and we're years ahead of the thing, but I personally don't see him being able to exercise nearly as much influence as many people have been saying, because there are just too many other things that are going to get in the way.
All right, Mr. Brooks Spector, great chatting to you. Thank you so much for your analysis. We appreciate your time.
It's a pleasure. You take care.
All right, you too. That was a U.S. foreign policy expert, Brooks Spector, joining us on the line from Johannesburg. This is the Globe on SABC News. Let's take a quick